Hi folks, I'm Craig Taylor, and as always a huge thanks for joining me here on my YouTube channel, the Bushcraft Padawan, and thanks for joining me in this week's Thursday's Thought. I've recently been rereading Wild Signs and Star Paths by Tristan Gooley, and in one of the earlier chapters he talks about the research into the book. He talks about planning to do the research. He talks about planning to go around the world visiting different tribes people, local people, indigenous people, people that are perhaps closer to having the sixth sense or being better aware of the sixth sense that this book talks about, the sixth sense that our ancestors would have had about what's happening around them and what that actually means and what that translates to. He was planning to go around the world to do this. And he makes some observations towards the end of this chapter that I think are really interesting, and they've made me rethink how I define something. So I thought I would share one or two of the paragraphs from this at most, and then tell you why it's made me recalibrate my definition and perhaps seek yours. So let's have a listen to what he has to say. All right, just a little bit more context. He's planning to go around the world to do this research, to go into these wild, remote, wilderness places to talk to people about this sixth sense. And then he has something of an epiphany. He makes something of a discovery on the South Downs of the UK, which I am actually, behind camera shot, I'm looking at the border of it. I live on the edge of the South Downs. So he makes a discovery in an area that's relatively close to where I live. Quite an innocent discovery, quite an everyday discovery, but the penny drops for him, and that's where I'm going to pick up reading from here. And it was at that moment I realised I had come very close to barking up the wrong tree in my research. I couldn't hope to develop this sense through interviews in a tropical wilderness. My only real chance lay much closer to home. Indigenous experience was the inspiration, not the solution, and I'd collected enough examples of it over the years to know what was possible. Any more would be self-indulgent. I felt some early pangs of regret, but they were replaced by an appreciation that I was one of many millions to misunderstand what is wild. I have read authors' definitions of wild as any place you walk for a week without meeting a road or a fence. But I think that is a narrow view, a consumer view, a transactional perspective that expects the landscape to give us the sense of wilderness in return for our travel. It is one I subscribed to for many years, which is partly why I found myself in those places. But now I see it as lazy. A sense of wild is engendered by awareness, a sense of connection and a deep understanding of any landscape. A real sense of wild can come from relearning the keys to accessing that deeper sense in any landscape. The pavement of any city side street wriggles with enough life to terrify and delight us if we choose to immerse ourselves in it. What do I take from that then? It's a really, really good point he makes. Many of us would consider wilderness and the wild as being somewhere remote, somewhere unusual, somewhere different, somewhere where you could perhaps walk for a week without coming across a fence or a road or another human being. I think I would have used to consider wild as one of those or more of those definitions myself. But then when I read the book, he talks about it's not necessarily about where you are that is wild. It's about what realisation comes to you whilst you are there, what connection whilst you are there. He was stood on the South Downs, which to anybody in this part of the world is not a wild area, to be perfectly honest, but he made a connection with something. He spotted something that reconnected him with this sense of wild. There's a wooden copse behind me here. It's probably 50 metres by 75 metres. It's really small. There's houses over there, and the town that I live in is just behind here. I am not in a wild area. I'm not in a wilderness area. I'm not in a remote area. I'm not in an area that is unusual to me. But if I go into these woods and look around and sense something, discover something, observe something, make a connection that I hadn't before, that reconnects me, I don't want to sound like a hippie here, but reconnects me with something deeper and more meaningful and something perhaps that everyday folks have perhaps missed, the way that a flower perhaps opens and grows towards the sun. Most people probably wouldn't spot that. The way perhaps animals behave at certain times of the day. Some people might not spot that. This is not a wild area that I'm in, but the things that I spot can make it wild, can make it wilderness. I hope that makes sense to you. I'm not sure it's going to make sense to me when I watch this video back, but I hope it makes sense to you. So here's my question. How do you define wild? Is it someplace that you can walk for a week without crossing another road, fence or human being? Is it somewhere you haven't been before? Does it have to be somewhere new? Does it have to be somewhere remote? Does it have to bring a sense of danger and excitement with it? Or can wild be actually somewhere that you go all the time, but it's what you observe and discover and connect with whilst you are there that might make it wild? As always, really looking forward to your answers. Please do feel to drop them into the comments below. If you're not yet a subscriber, what are you doing with your life? Come on, book your ideas up. You know better than that. Click on that subscribe button and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.